Hi there friends, my name's Linda Dolke. I'm a demonstrator with Stampin'Up in Australia, and today I'm showing you how I made this cool background. So this is a super simple technique. I'm going to be using the Butterfly Brilliant stamp set to get this lovely effect, and I'll take you through it step by step, but it is really very easy. It's also a lot of fun. This is what I call a random background, which means it's going to turn out different every single time. So when I do it today, it's going to look different to the one that you see here. And there can be a whole bunch of reasons for that, and we'll talk about them as we go. The set that I'm using though is the Butterfly Brilliance stamp set. Now this is a background stamp, which means it is actually one great big stamp. There it is on the block. I've got this on block F. If you don't have block F, that's okay. Grab yourself a Stamparatus plate. Stamparatus is just as good or even better sometimes for stamping because you can always restamp if you mess it up. But I'm going to show you how to get the best result with this. We're going to be using a piece of basic white cardstock. This is just the thin cardstock. Now you can experiment with different types of paper for this. So for example, if I did this effect on a piece of watercolor paper or shimmer white, it's going to give me a slightly different effect than the basic white that I'm using right here, which is quite thin. So really choosing different papers will give you different looks. The other thing is I'm using re-inkers to achieve this look. So I could use, if you don't have re-inkers, you could actually apply your ink pad directly to the piece of acetate. So this is another thing you're going to need. I've just got a piece of acetate. The acetate just needs to be bigger than your piece of white. Okay, just needs to be bigger than that. So I've actually got a piece that's a reasonable size. I'll put that card out of the way. The first thing we're going to do though is we're going to ink up our stamp, and I'm using Versamark for this because I'm going to be embossing on this piece. So I'm just going to use my Versamark. I'll pick it up because actually it wobbles the camera a little bit, and I'm just going to ink this up as well as I can, give it a good old tap, and then I'm going to lay it down so that the stamp is face up. Now normally when we stamp, we apply the stamp down onto the paper, but for a really big stamp like this, you'll find you get a better effect if you put your paper on top of your stamp. So the reverse, we're putting the stamp underneath face up, so we just lay our paper down over the top. And then you're going to grab a piece of scrap paper and you're just going to pop that down over the top so that we don't get ink on our fingers. Not that it really matters with Versamark because it's clear anyway. The whole point of Versamark is it's a clear sticky ink. That's really important. You do need to have a pigment ink or a stamp pad like the Versamark that allows you to apply your embossing powder over the top, and it will stick to it, okay, because it's a little bit sticky. All right, so now I'm going to take that piece of paper off. Whoop. And I should have got a really good inking. Move my stamp out of the way, and I'm just going to put this down. I notice that I've got a little bit of a mark here. I'll just remove that with my scissors. No, that's okay. It's not going to matter anyway because we're going to be putting our white embossing powder over the top of this. So I'm using white, but you could also use clear because it's a white background anyway. I find white just gives me a little bit of a cleaner look, but either is fine. And I'm using a little container underneath so that as I tap my powder off, it just goes straight into the container. That way it doesn't make a mess, and the cleanup is super easy. Hopefully you can see the butterflies starting to appear as the powder sticks to the ink. Last little bit. And we're going to tap that off as well. And I'm pretty happy with that. I usually give it a bit of a tap over the back just to make sure that as much of my powder is back into the container as possible. Now if you do have any little bits that seem to have ended up where they shouldn't, don't panic too much. This technique is quite forgiving, and it's going to, as you can see, you know, you've got all your mottles. Oh, let's find the original one. your models of different colors in here. So if you do end up with a little bit of stray powder, it's really not going to matter. Having said that, I'm getting rid of any that are very obviously visible. There's some here. Sometimes I like to just use something sharp like a pair of scissors or a pair of tweezers or whatever I happen to have on hand. And I'm just going to get rid of that extra powder there. Even your fingernails. Mind you, I'm using a finger that has almost no fingernail, but that's okay. Alright, I'm happy with that. That's good. Now I'm just going to tap the rest of my powder back into my little tub. The good thing about embossing powder is it lasts for ages. So you get a good long life out of it. Just whatever you don't use, tap back into the container. Alright, so now it's time to heat this, or cook it if you like, and for that we're going to use a heat tool. Now I'm going to be speeding up this part of the video so you don't have to sit here and wait for it to cook. It'll be much quicker that way, and hopefully the video is a little bit more fun to watch. I'm using the Stampin' Up heat tool, but you can use any heat tool you might have. Try and pick one that's got a protective plastic piece on the end here, because this little metal piece inside gets super hot, so you really want to have that protection there. I also prefer one that has 2 speeds. For this I'm going to be using the higher speed because I just want it to get cooked as quickly as possible. So here we go. Okay, so now that I've done that, you should be able to tell quite easily when it's cooked, because it'll be hard and shiny and you can feel that the image is raised. You can touch it almost immediately. It's warm, but it's quite dry and it's not too hot. Okay, so now we get to play with our background, which I think is the fun part. For this, like I mentioned before, I'm going to be using re-inkers. Now I picked these 2 specifically at the moment because these are 2 of our retiring ink colours. These ones, as of Thursday, these are going to be on the retiring list, which means they're going to sell out really, really quickly, and I wanted to get the chance to play with them before they were gone. So I'm going to bring in my piece of acetate, and for this I'm going to be dropping little bits of the Seaside Spray and Pretty Peacock all over this piece of acetate. Now you might notice on my original here, I just want to show you this before we start, I've got a fair bit of light colour. All that means is I simply added more of the Seaside Spray than I did of the Pretty Peacock. Okay, so I added less of the darker colour to keep it quite light. Now here's another one I did a little earlier. Haven't even made this one into a card yet. You can see it's considerably darker, and that's simply because I added more of the Pretty Peacock. So really you get to control how much of the color, or you get to control the result a little bit by adding more or less of a particular color. However, it will turn out different to whatever you think it's going to be. So that's, to me, kind of the fun of it. But here you can see a really good example of which color I've added the most of. So for today, let's start with our lighter colour. It doesn't really matter which one you start with, and I'm just going to randomly drip some of this Seaside Spray, and I'm doing a fair amount because I've decided I would like a lighter look. Alright, just here, there and everywhere, and then not as much of the Pretty Peacock. So this one should end up being a lighter version. Okay, so definitely more of one than the other. Now I've got here a water pen, but you could just use a regular brush. Just wet your brush. I'm just squeezing a little bit of the water through, and I'm just going to kind of go over those blobs. Oh, actually I just realized something. Even before you do that, you should probably spritz first. It doesn't really matter, but I think the spritzing will make it easier. So these spritzers come in a pack of 2, and I'm going to make sure that the nozzle is facing away from me. Ask me how I know that, because there's been too many occasions when I just haven't. Yep, this is better. So what you're going to do is you're going to keep spraying until you see the dots start to expand a little bit, kind of moving around, and you can see that there's little bits of water sort of pooled all over the acetate. Then I get my brush in, and I'm just going to go in and kind of smoosh this around a little bit. So the colours are kind of mixed together. Okay, kind of looks cool like that, doesn't it? Very, very pretty effect, and you can see where the two colours are kind of getting themselves together. All right, now I'm going to make sure I use the butterfly, the hard butterfly side down. I want to put this into my ink, and you'll notice that the back of the paper will saturate quite quickly, so don't be alarmed by that. I'm just going to push this down and smush it around a little bit. You might get inky fingers at this point. If that worries you, maybe wear gloves. I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to have a look at it. Ooh, that's quite nice. Alright, so this one is definitely going to be darker than the first one I did, but probably not quite as dark as the second. At the moment it looks as dark, but when they dry, they do dry lighter. Now you can see I've missed some bits here, but I actually quite like that effect. Totally up to you. If you want, if you decided that you didn't like this big white blob here, you could come in here and run that bit over a bit more of the paper, the ink sitting on the acetate, and maybe down the bottom here I could add a bit more too. But totally up to you how much you want to add. You might decide you quite like those white bits. Now, this is actually ready to use immediately. However, my suggestion to you is if you're going to put some sort of runner like Seal or Seal Plus over the back of it, don't put those on yet, because what happens is when you run them along the back, it's really easy, while it's wet or damp, it's really easy to take the surface off your paper. So my suggestion would be wait for it to dry completely before you try and stick it on with, if you're using runners like that. If you're using tape, you could do it straight away, or even Tombow multi-purpose adhesive. That would be okay as well, but I prefer to let mine dry for a little while. Plus it gives me more of an idea of what it's going to look like, because it will actually lighten up. The colour will fade a little bit as it dries. So you're going to end up, this one I think is going to be somewhere between these two. So this one's now dry. Obviously this one I've put together, it's quite light, and I used a lot more of the Seaside spray. This one is going to be lighter. It's going to be like light, medium and dark. This is going to be my darkest one. But at the moment, this one still looks quite dark because it hasn't dried yet. Okay, now to finish off this card, all I did was I just stamped my sentiment on a little white strip here, and I've attached that with a couple of dimensionals to the base. I also cut one of the detailed butterflies from the matching dies, because there's a Brilliant Wings die set that beautifully matches this stamp set, and one of the smallest of the detailed butterflies, I cut one of those out of silver foil and added that to it as well, and of course a little bit of bling there as well. And that's how easy it is to do this background. Easy, hey? Alright, I hope you enjoyed it. I did originally do this video on my Facebook Live page, so if you're on my private Facebook group, you would have seen me do this already, although it's a little bit different, of course, every time you do it, so it's still nice to see it done a little differently. I hope you have a great day wherever you are, and check back again. I'll have lots more videos up for you soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.